All right. We're really excited to have Lauren here. I'm going to let you go ahead and explain what you do, who you are, all that good stuff.
Sure.
But so glad to have you here and teach us about skincare today.
Thank you. Thank you, Foxhaven, for having me. Thank you, Alex, for being here to sort of make sure everything goes over smoothly. To those of you that are already tuned in, thank you so much for being present. It's so fun to do online workshops, but it's really fun to get to interact live with some people as well. So I'm grateful for you showing up live. My name is Lauren Dodge. I live in Maryland, so that's how I know Foxhaven, but I'm currently visiting some family here in Utah in the beautiful Mojave Desert. And I started a business with my husband, Brian, in 2011 called Fruits to the Roots. We have a wonderful website where we offer a range of skincare products from cleansers, toners, treatments, serums, moisturizers, all sorts of things. I started my business as an intuitive herbalist working primarily with blending teas for people in the farmer's market. So that is how I got my start with our business. I was literally curating on the spot. So I had roughly 50 herbs that I would bring to farmer's market every weekend and create bespoke blends for people depending on what they were looking for, what kind of balance or nutrition they would like to add to their lifestyle. Truly, Fruits to the Roots and my journey with skincare began through plant medicine, but I first discovered my love for skin and helping to heal the skin because of my own struggles as a teenager and as a young adult. I just had very cystic acne and scar tissue damage and all sorts of things that nobody was able to help me with. I was seeing dermatologists, herbalists, everyone, and at a certain point, nobody was recommending the right thing for my skin. At a certain point, I was given a gift of a face oil and it just totally opened the doors. I dove into what the different oils could do for my skin, what the different extracts and botanicals infused could do for my skin. And it really began to click that internal, external compatibility between teas and skincare. And then I started making soaps. So soaps were some of my very first products. And my first skincare product was an oil. First facial product was an oil that took me about 7 years to perfect because I was a perfectionist at the time. Now it takes me about 6 months to finalize something. But it was a face oil that I infused. And so I'm really excited to get to share the infusion process with you. And sort of talk to you about its importance and the different layers of the skin today. So with that, I would love if you guys would reach out to me after the class if you have any questions. I think we'll have some time at the end as well if you want to put things in the chat, or if you're on screen, you can wave at me. And if you're comfortable talking, we can do that as well. But I'll put my email and my website information in the chat at the end before we leave. And right now, I'm going to make sure that the document is uploaded for you guys from my computer. Hold on one second. So we've got 2 documents I'm going to give you guys. One is a botanical images and one is a file on how to do infusions so that you have a recap. However you learn, you'll be able to either follow along and write your own notes now, or in the end, grab that oil infusion recipe document. So both of those are in the chat now. I'll make sure to put my information in there at the end as well. And with that, we're going to get going. Welcome to infusions and introduction to the skin. So if you guys want to go ahead and take a look at the screen, I'm going to share a PDF with you of the layers of the skin. And can you all see that? Perfect. So in the skin, we have the importance of learning about these different layers of the skin is that they do varying things depending on what you're trying to create an oil infusion for. It's also just important overall in learning about the skin that you have a basic understanding of the different components and layers. Every layer does a little bit of something different. So I'm going to start you off with a myth. Who here, if you're on screen, you can raise your hand. Who here has heard that your skin absorbs 70% of everything you put on it? It's a myth that's out there, and most people have heard this. It's actually a myth. I keep saying myth. It is a myth. The reality is that when you are putting anything onto your skin, some of it will be absorbed, some of it may not be absorbed. It's one of those things that, sorry, I'm losing. Can you guys still see me? Okay, thank you. It's one of those things that it can end up in your bloodstream or not. It sort of depends on a range of different things. The reason I like to talk about this is that it is something that's very misconceived. It is important to always be aware of the quality of your ingredients that you're working with, but a range of things depending on the person's health of their skin, temperature and humidity in the climate that they live in, the mechanism in which the skincare product is delivered to the skin, all of those things can affect how much is actually taken into the skin to benefit it on those different layers we're going to talk about, and then give you that lovely glow. And sometimes the product itself is just not very effective. So learning about the different layers of the skin will give you a clearer picture as to how to sort of think outside the box and thoughtfully formulate a lovely infusion that you can turn into something later. So as you can see, the skin is made up of the primary functions of the skin. It's the largest organ in your body, and it is primarily going to be about touch, and then it's also an elimination tool for our bodies. So things that we don't need, like a buildup of minerals, toxins, those types of things are eliminated through the skin, through the sweat glands, through our pores. So it's really important to be aware of the things that we're putting onto our bodies and that we're putting into our bodies. But that's why it's so important to learn how to take care of our skin, because it is the largest organ. Protecting your body. Your skin has a microbiome of bacteria that's beneficial, that lives topically on it, which makes it really important for the immune system. The skin also has an ability to help regulate your body temperature. So when you're getting a fever, that is your body sending a signal to yourself that something's not right, that you're not eliminating toxins properly, that you are building up something within the immune system that needs to be released. And then the third function of the skin, third primary function of the skin, is that every approximately 28 days, it renews itself. And that we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but obviously we all know how important it is to have that renewal process. With the idea of it being our largest organ, it's the thing that is literally encasing every cell in our body, protecting us from outside factors, alerting us when something isn't quite right. So that rejuvenation is important. And as we age, that renewal system actually declines and is a bit slower depending on who you are, your lifestyle, where you live, how you treat your skin, everything. But that can usually, it usually starts going up when we get into our 30s and can take as long as like 40 to 60 days to fully renew. So pretty interesting. The three major layers of the skin, we're going to talk a little bit in detail about each one, but the three main layers are the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So here we have the epidermis, here's the dermis, and as you can see, the dermis is actually going to make up a significant part of your skin. It's larger in comparison to the epidermis and the hypodermis. All three layers are very important. So in thinking about them, we're going to talk first about the epidermis. The epidermis is made up of 3 primary kinds of cells. The cells themselves are the, excuse me, are the keratinocytes, the Langerhans cells, which are these purple guys. The keratinocytes are these guys. This is the Langerhans, and this is the melanocytes. And each one of those things has a very different function. Keratinocytes are going to be something, again, these guys that look like little bricks. For those of you that might think back on science class, I remember taking a bit of skin, either swabbing the inside of my cheek or taking a dead skin sample from the top of a dry area of skin and looking at it under a microscope. The keratinocytes, these guys, are all of the sort of brick-like structures that you would have seen under a microscope. And what keratinocytes do, they form the uppermost part of the epidermis, and they are all about that layer of protection. So what happens in the skin is the keratinocytes go from being like all plump and new and shiny at the bottom of the epidermis, and then they become flattened and actually rise to the top of the epidermis, so that top layer of the skin, and it flattens out and hardens, and it becomes the dead sort of dry skin cells. You might think overall that this is something that you're like, oh, I want to get rid of that, but it's the protective layer. Our skin actually creates this wonderful dry layer so that it protects all of the moisture-rich cells that live underneath of it. All of those cells that live underneath of it are made up of about 80% water. So any exposure to those cells, you're going to damage a good amount. So thinking about things like exfoliation. Exfoliation is very important because it helps create cell turnover rate for those keratinocytes, those healthy ones that rise gently to the top, flatten out, and then create that protective surface. But those dead skin cells for a period of time are also very important. It's what we see. This is all going to be made up of those keratinocytes, every layer of skin that we can visibly see. The reason that it's so important to protect those 80% water-filled cells is that should this dry air make contact with the living cell, it would actually shrivel up and die, and we just don't want to do that. So overall, regeneration of the dermis, of the epidermis is very, very important. And again, that's this process that takes between 28 and 60 days, depending on where we are in our life, who we are, how we take care of our bodies, how we take care of our skin. So that is the keratinocytes. So that's these guys, remember? The Langerhans cells are very, very cool. The Langerhans cells are about 2 to 4% of our skin cells. They are total of the epidermis. So 2 to 4% of the epidermis. These cells are really important, and they help the immune system to function properly. So what they do is those little purple tentacles that you can see, I'll point them out, these little purple tentacles, they actually reach out and gather up all of the particles and things, toxins in our body that we don't want living in our skin, that we don't want staying in our bodies. So they reach out, they make contact, they grab onto those things, and then they move throughout the epidermis into what is called the basement membrane. And the basement membrane is what holds the epidermis and the dermis together. So it's sort of a sticky layer, and it moves through those, and then the Langerhans take those toxins into the lymphatic system and then drain out through the blood. So really, really important to keep our skin healthy. And thinking about that there's only 2 to 4% of our epidermis is made up of these. This is another reason why natural skincare, thinking about herbs that are helpful in eliminating toxins is really important. So those are the Langerhans cells. Melanocytes make up these guys right here, this sort of reddish color in the document. Melanocytes are going to be the pigment melanin, so the chemical that makes up the skin tan. or that makes the skin tan. Darker skin tones don't necessarily they do not have more melanin cells. It's actually that the melanocytes are more active, so they produce more melanin. And the function of the melanin is to create a protective shield for the keratinocytes. So again, that tan or the color in our skin tone, that is a protective layer. It's part of what makes up the protection system for the epidermis. These melanin particles, they cluster together, they absorb the sun's rays, and they pass them through the upper layers of the epidermis. So that, for you, in a nutshell, is the epidermis. Are we following along okay? Cool. So next, we have the dermis. This is going to be that thicker layer. So remember, this is the epidermis, that top layer. The dermis is going to be the largest layer in our skin. This is what contains the hair, the sweat ducts, the hair muscle, which the hair muscle is what makes the hair stand up when we're cold. So it creates a sort of a shield to bring in the warmth. So that's what makes the hair stand up. The sebaceous glands, which we'll talk a bit more about those, but if you've heard of sebum, sebum is produced in these sebaceous glands, and we will talk about that. The blood vessels, the nerves and nerve endings, and the sweat glands. So as you can see, this is a really important layer of the skin. A lot of stuff happens in these layers. Sweating is important, as we've already talked about, to eliminate toxins. The hair, there's so many people removing their hair, and all of these little hair follicles on our face, on our bodies, are so important and help in the function of our bodies. And as we continue to age, sometimes we get more hairs in places that we're like, why? It's our body's natural way of protecting itself a little bit further as we continue to age. Sometimes it can also be a hormonal thing, but hair is important. So this area of the dermis, I'm going to scroll down for a second in my notes. So the dermis, again, made up of the primary layer of the skin. It's that tough, elastic area that is going to have all of those things we just discussed. There are specialized cells within the dermis called fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are really important in the helpful production of collagen. So collagen is what is going to allow us to have that firm, elastin, youthful glow within the skin. Collagen is going to be very important for a number of us as we continue to age. So something to think about, that layer of the dermis. How do we penetrate through the epidermis into the dermis to create something truly beautiful that shows up topically? This layer also consists of nerves, which nerves are very important part of our sensories in our skin. They're going to alert us, like if we have an infection. They're going to alert us if something feels itchy. And all of those are signals to us that we may be having some sort of a reaction, or that we need help eliminating a toxin from within our system. In addition to these functions, we have those hair follicles, sebaceous glands, etc. Sebaceous glands, again, getting back to sebum, a lot of hype about sebum and keeping our sebum balanced, very, very important. And there's a lot of hype around it for many reasons. Sebaceous glands are going to make up a significant amount, sebaceous glands are all over our skin and our scalp. The only places where we're not going to have sebaceous glands are going to be our thicker parts of skin. So our palms, the soles of our feet, those areas are not going to contain the same layer system to the skin. Sebaceous glands produce a natural moisturizer for our skin. It's sort of a wax or oily substance that helps to regulate the amount of hydration that our skin contains. When you are combining oils on the skin, you'll notice like they penetrate at different rates and things. This is because naturally, when you're applying an oil, the sebaceous glands already themselves are producing a significant amount of oil if they're functioning correctly. And that is going to be what helps to protect the skin. It is going to give your hair a nice healthy sheen. It's going to help your body retain proper amounts of moisture. It's also going to help prevent things like acne breakouts, dermal reactions. It's a protection. So when we're layering moisturizers or different kinds of oils onto our skin, they absorb at different rates. And we will talk a little bit more about absorption rate as well. But just something to keep in mind, the sebaceous glands help with that process. They actually function in circulating, controlled by hormones circulating in the bloodstream. So you'll see that, like, if you're making an infusion oil for someone who's a teenager, a young teenager, or just going through puberty, or even someone that maybe is going into menopause, the hormones have a significant role to play on the sebaceous glands. So you'll get things like acne, super dry skin, irritated skin. So that's the functioning of the sebaceous gland is a bit off when those things happen, but it is somewhat natural. Okay, next we have the hypodermis, which is this very bottom layer. And the primary cell that you're going to find in the hypodermis is this adipocyte cell. So in talking about the hypodermis is the subcutaneous layer. So it's that very bottom layer of those three primary layers of the skin. It's the deepest, thickest layer of the skin. And it's going to be sandwiched between the dermis and the fascial tissue below it. So that, again, right here on our document, this is the hypodermis. And within there, the main functions of the hypodermis are going to be energy reserves from the fat storage in the tissue. So this is where a lot of our fat cells are stored. So it helps to regulate things like temperature, the amount of energy our skin has to then produce those new skin cells, insulation, so keeping us warm, letting us cool more easily. It's also going to be the underlying portion where injury shows up and occurs. So the tissues there are going to take in things like bruising, things like cystic acne that then turns into a scar, or broken capillaries are going to then have a resonance in this layer. And then also, cosmetically, the appearance of the skin is affected by this layer. So in thinking about, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second, and if I can figure it out. In thinking about when we are developing an oil or any kind of skincare product, how do we penetrate those several layers of the skin? How do we get down into those deeper layers so that we can create some really wonderful healing? That's the primary goal, right? So I'm going to share this screen again. Okay. In review, I've created this little chart here. The skin's functions, holding the body's contents together. That is going to happen in the epidermis through keratinocytes, waterproofing, keratinocytes and lipids, those oils that our body naturally expels, are going to waterproof the skin slightly so that we retain our natural oils better, so that we have hydration, so that we have balance on the skin, so that the bacteria stays happy. Protection from sunlight. Those are those melanocytes, the epidermal, which is the, again, staying in that top layer, that's that melanocyte, is going to create more activation in those melanite cells to protect our skin from sunlight. Recognizing foreign bodies. Those are those silly purple guys. So those Langerhans cells, those hang out in the epidermis, and they are going to latch on to anything that they recognize as a toxin, or it doesn't belong, or there's an overabundance of. and they're going to filter down through the layers of the skin into the lymphatic system and then get rid of that waste. So very, very important that we maintain health for those guys to do what they need to do. Controlling the body temperature. That's going to be your blood vessels in the dermis. That's also going to come from the third layer, the hypodermis, where the fat cells are stored. Those are going to also help with regulating and maintaining body temperature. Pain and injury warning. These are the nerve endings. And as you're thinking about in the future, working with the infusion process, there's a lovely way that you can work on so many things with oil infusions, from skin care, hair care, scalp care, injury and recovery from injury, protection from infection, antibacterials. There's so many things to think about. So pain and injury warning, thinking about how can I support these nerve endings in that second layer, the thickest layer of the skin, the dermis. And then protection from infection, the epidermis, so that beneficial bacteria that lives on the skin. These are the primary things that like help me when I'm thinking about an oil infusion or a skincare product. I like to think about, what is my primary goal? What is my primary function for this particular blend that I want to work on? To me, I think about this sort of stuff first, and then I go into my plant allies. I go into my essential oils, thinking about what would benefit these things then. So with that, that is sort of our introduction and complementary to what we're going to be talking about with infusions. Does anyone have any questions? Feel pretty good? I'm going to check the chat. Thank you for your thumbs up, Theodora. Thank you, Alex. Chat, I don't think anybody has any questions there. Able to download. Thank you. Oh, Alex, did you get everything figured out with the stuff going on with the PDFs there? Thank you. Okay. Okay, so everyone's good. Oh, thank you everybody for the thumbs up. I appreciate it. Okay, so next, let me pull up our beautiful botanicals. Okay. So our botanicals, here we are. And okay, so on your screen, you're going to have your botanical images. So this is going to be something that you guys will want to keep open while we talk. We are going to start with calendula. And calendula is something that I love to use in nearly every infusion. It's good for so many things, but it's just a lovely, wonderful, happy flower for me. You'll find as you start working with infusions that there's things that you're attracted to and you aren't quite sure why. You just want it in everything. There's a little bit of wisdom planted within that seed of thought or that intuition. Diving into the why for yourself personally is a wonderful way to then continue your education with that plant. So calendula, this guy here, these beautiful golden orange flowers with this incredible green foliage. Foxhaven grows these, I know that, so get your hands on some when you can. Put some in your garden. They're amazing at controlling pests and things that you don't want growing or eating your vegetables. Calendula contains a super high concentration of flavonoids or plant antioxidants, which helps to benefit numerous skin conditions, things relieving everything from premature aging to allergic reactions, relieving inflammation, things that are sort of those outside factors in our environment. Internally, they're going to do a whole bunch of wonderful things to do similar, like inflammation, relieve stomach ache, digestive upset, calendula, one of the reasons that I really love to work with it in nearly everything is that it's something that's safe for all skin types, unless you have a severe allergy to this kind of plant. It's even safe to create an infusion with calendula for like a diaper rash, or someone that has an extreme allergic reaction to other things. I have a client right now that she doesn't know what she's done, but she's getting this redness around her tear duct, and I've given her a recipe to create a calendula infusion, and that reducing irritation, the itch, the redness, it's really just wonderful. It also is fantastic at helping with a lot of dry conditions, things like eczema or acne that presents as overly oily and then dries out the skin. So calendula is a lovely, lovely, lovely plant that we are going to put in this infusion to help with everything from irritation, inflammation, you name it, and skin regeneration. As far as our next plant we have, this is plantain, and this is plantain major. So it's the larger leaf form of plantain. Plantain is awesome. I love, this is another one that I have a hard time not putting in everything for myself because it just grows everywhere. I once read that Susan Weed has never seen a lawn where she couldn't find plantain. And I love that because it, for me, nature presents medicine to us everywhere. But when something like this is so prevalent, it's just calling to be worked with. And it's, again, another plant that so many skin types can really resonate with and benefit from. So growing in most places across the country, plantain is a wonderful antibacterial. Again, a lot of antioxidants, those flavonoids, helping with things from acne, psoriasis, inflammation, itching, swelling, allergies. There's just so many things. Beyond it being a very easy to identify plant physically when you see it, when you pull a leaf off of this plant, another way to identify it is by breaking it apart. It has these fibrous tissues, almost as if you're separating a piece of a bandage, where there's these fibrous tissues that just want to keep it connected. So plantain is also something that you can use as a poultice very easily. And a wonderful way, like if you're out on a hike or working in your garden and you get like a mosquito bite or a bug bite or a sting or something, you can chew on a plantain leaf for a minute and then to get it sort of broken down and then just slap it straight on your skin. And it's going to help immediately to soothe the reaction, also providing a little bit of a mucilage like feel, a cooling sensation to the skin topically. So I love plantain. It's just such a happy looking plant. And the flowers are really fun to work with in a flower essence, if any of you work with flower essences already. Next we have yarrow. Yarrow is such a cool plant. I'm not going to talk about a plant today that I don't think is cool. Yarrow is another one of my favorites. And for those of you that are in Maryland, this is another plant that you can easily find growing a lot of places. It's a wild plant. Yarrow, I was recently reading, I studied anthropology for a while, and I remembered that at 60,000 years ago is when yarrow can be traced to. So 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals were actually putting yarrow at their loved ones' grave sites. There's so many things throughout history with yarrow that make it such a significant part of herbal medicine. Thinking about that early humanoids, that early man was already drawn to something, and they were more in tune with the land than we are now. I just wonder what they knew, but they wanted their ancestors to travel into the next part of their existence with this wonderful healing plant. So Achillea mellifolium, named after the Greek god Achilles, who, according to legend, used this plant to staunch wounds on the battlefield. I love that. I love picking up these little tidbits of folklore and history when you start working with a plant or trying to understand a plant from a different angle. The importance in that for me personally is, again, just that recognition with our ancestry and with sort of thinking about what our oldest ancestors may have been doing with this. But it also teaches us something. So there's something about folklore and legend. There's a tidbit of truth in it. It may not be, hold on one second. It may not be the entire truth, but there's a tidbit of truth in there. So true to its name, Achillea mellifolium, and that folklore around this plant, it was something, hold on one second, give me 1 second. You're being really loud, sorry, it's really distracting. Okay, sorry mom. Okay guys, sorry about that. Give me 1 second, let me find where I am in my notes. Due to that folklore and legend, we can gather from that that it may have been good for things like staunching wounds. And today we now know that it is something that is wonderful at helping to stop bleeding, helpful for extreme menstrual cramps. So working with it in an oil infusion, it is going to do things like help accelerate wound healing and staunching blood. It's going to be something that is great for alleviating severe cramping, helping with breaking fevers. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about. Yarrow has a wonderful warming sensation. So if you know that naturally your constitution runs a little bit hot, that is something that you just want to keep in mind. Yarrow may or may not be the best plant for you because it is going to bring up the feeling of warmth and bring up your temperature to break a fever should you ever have one. So really nice in chest congestion, either salves or oil infusions, and things that are going to be specific to wound healing, accelerating wound healing. The only thing I want to bring up in this plant is that I've noticed that in working with it and wild harvesting it, sometimes occasionally I will get a dermal sensitivity to it. So it's not an intense burning or itching, it's just, it feels a little tingly on my skin. So for those of you that may have very sensitive skin, thinking about this as a plant that you want to be careful harvesting and then working with in the kitchen, you may also want to wear gloves. I don't have that same reaction when I then use it in a product. So love yarrow, and it comes in all sorts of beautiful colors and is wonderful just to have in your garden. Okay, next we have St. John's wort. And look at those beautiful flowers. Those are such happy flowers. And this is a wonderful part of this medicine. At least in me, it brings up this immense, lovely, happy feeling. I can't look at St. John's wort flower and not feel happy and excited. And again, that's a signal to me as someone who works with plants in a very intuitive capacity that I should think about that. What does that potentially mean? Sitting with a plant and observing it, whether it's through the idea of doctrine of signatures, seeing physically the formation of the plant to think about maybe an area of the body that it might be helpful with, or just intuitively sitting with it and looking at its coloring. This is golden sunshine to me. So that immediately tells me, I wonder, are you trying to tell me, plant, that you're going to help me feel better, that you're going to elevate my mood, that you are going to give me a feeling of rejuvenation? Guess what? All of those things are important in St. John's wort medicine. So, and traditionally it is used for a significant number of depressive qualities in people when using it internally, but topically it's going to be anti-inflammatory. It's going to relieve irritation. It's going to accelerate healing, which again, that sunshine aspect, or the idea of the sun. It's all about rejuvenation. It's all about new life. So a really, really cool plant. And some cool things, this one is great to have in a lot of first aid remedies, as it does have an antibacterial like quality to it as well. So that's St. John's wort. And I could probably just sit with that plant all day. So next we have echinacea, which is another happy flower. Echinacea. This plant, Echinacea purpurea, there's so many kinds of echinacea. This plant in particular is Echinacea purpurea. High in antioxidants. All of the plants we're talking about today are going to have a significant amount of antioxidants because we're talking about how do we relieve that oxidative stress? How do we create more skin acceleration? How do we create relief for these topical things? So echinacea is going to do all that. But the other really cool thing, remember we were talking about how important it is to balance and maintain the bacteria and the immune system, natural immune system quality to the skin. Echinacea, naturally an immune system boosting plant. Also going to be helpful for helping the skin's natural response in protecting the immune system as well. So a great thing to put into oil infusions, and it's going to benefit significantly that epidermis layer because of the Langerhans cells that are in there. So remember, the Langerhans, the pretty purple guys that relieve all of that toxic buildup from our bodies. That's echinacea. It's so important. And look at that, again, just such a happy flower. And then next, and last but not least, we have comfrey. And comfrey is another one that you can find years and years and years and years of use of comfrey medicinally all around the world. I don't know the exact number of species of comfrey, but it's like upwards of like 30 to 40 different species of comfrey. So the primary one that I have worked with and that I think grows most prevalently in the United States and that you would probably have medicinally in your garden is this, I'm going to mess this up, Symphytium, I'm not going to, it's Russian comfrey. So it's a little bit thinner leaf and has these beautiful, beautiful bellflowers. And again, something wonderful for pollinators to have in your garden. Bees, hummingbirds, everybody loves this plant. Keep it protected from rabbits if you have them because they will eat it up, especially the young parts. But these leaves are fantastic, chopped up and put into salads. In an infusion, however, they are going to be helpful for everything from healing wounds. They've been used historically to help mend bones and fractures. Again, another one to stop heavy bleeding. This particular plant contains a high mucilage content, which is going to be great at helping to soothe irritated skin. Mucilage is something that is going to, the best way I can describe it is that it feels a little bit gooey. So when you chop this plant up and you're working with the leaf fresh, it produces a little bit of this slimy, gooey feeling, similar to slippery elm bark or marshmallow root. All of those things are marshmallow leaf. All of those things are going to have that mucilage content, which is super, super softening for the skin and improves the amount of hydration that we can maintain in our skin. So really great, encouraging moisture retention. It's also high in allantoin, which is going to help promote the regeneration of tissue and benefit our health overall. So that skin regeneration portion, that tissue regeneration portion, that is going to be something that can help those deeper layers of the skin. So that's why that's why we're talking about comfrey today and why I wanted to share it in this oil infusion class. So that is comfrey.
Lauren, a quick question.
Yeah.
We have Christina asking, do the different colors of yarrow have similar benefits?
Yes, I believe that the white yarrow and the yellow yarrow are going to be the most like traditionally used in herbal medicine. I actually fell in love with the red variety and I'm growing it in my own yard. This is a photo from a wild harvested one that I did from my yard. So it's that white variety. But yes, they're all going to have varying amounts, but I believe that naturally, the white and the yellow are going to have stronger medicinal properties. And that's a question that I'm not 100% sure on, I'll be honest. The red variety is something that I hadn't seen until I moved to Maryland about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Wow, 2 years ago. So what I can do is I can absolutely confirm that. They're all going to be okay to use, but I believe that it's the white and the yellow that are going to have the strongest medicinal quality.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions about herbs or the any questions at this point? Feeling good? Okay. Okay, so that's our introduction to the skin. That is our introduction to the botanicals that we are going to work with in this particular oil infusion. Next, I'm going to walk you through how to make an oil infusion. You guys do have what is an oil infusion in the chat for those of you that haven't already downloaded that PDF. I'm going to share it on the screen, but make sure you download that PDF. Okay, where are you? Do I not have you pulled up? Give me just 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. I will pull it up. That. Okay. Where are you? Okay. Here we are. Okay, what is an oil infusion? There are so many, you can read book after book after book, blog after blog after blog to understand how to do an oil infusion. There are a number of different ways, and depending on the kind of plant that you're going to be working with, there are specific ways that you might want to follow depending on the plant. Today we're going to talk about, I think I did 1, 2, 3, 4 different kinds of infusions, but I'm going to, they all have overlapping qualities, and then we will do an oil infusion also at the end. An oil infusion is a maceration of oil, which is going to be the menstruum that you're using to pull out those chemical constituents from your beneficial chemical constituents from your plant fibers. So it's a maceration. These infusions, when applied topically, are going to create a protective covering, which slowly absorbs into the skin, helping to provide nutrients. Sometimes you're picking up aroma depending on the kind of infusion that you're doing or the plant that you're working with, the ratio of plant to oil as well. You can pick up some of the aroma that are going to help soothe, heal, depending on what kind of herbs and oils you choose. Oil infusions can be used in the kitchen to add additional minerals and nutrients. I love creating oil infusions that then you can turn into dips for bread, or even using it as like a salad, part of your salad dressing. It's a really fun way to, especially if you're growing culinary herbs, those have wonderful medicinal qualities as well. So it's a way that you can introduce that into your diet in like a little more playful way. But also things like comfrey, things like St. John's wort, burdock root, yarrow, those more pungent things, you can sneak in their nutrients to your diet by doing an oil infusion that you then reserve for cooking. Therapeutically is what we're going for today. So this has, our goal when we're creating a therapeutic infusion oil is to support that top layer of the skin, and then also think about how do we drive those nutrients down into those deeper levels to support the overall functioning of the skin. So that comfrey is going to dive deep and really support those deeper levels of blood vessels, helping with supporting the hydration levels of the skin, calendula is going to be great for that top layer because of its anti-itching quality. Also, like when we get dead skin cells, if we're not exfoliating properly, sometimes it can create a little dermal reaction or an itch. So all of those herbs we chose today you'll see as we start working with this, there's a reason. Basic dry plant infusion. So again, there are so many ways to do a plant infusion. I typically, for today, we are going to follow this basic dry plant infusion process and then add heat. So that's going to be the difference, and we'll talk about that in a second. So choosing your herbs, again, thinking about what you want to do with your oil infusion. And there's a process of, you can either grind them into a fine powder or I like to beat, like if I'm working with a root, like burdock root is an awesome thing to do in infusions. It actually infuses really well, being a root, into oils. But I like to sort of beat it either with a wooden rolling pin between two layers of cloth to sort of break it apart or just give it more surface area. The other thing you can do is use a spice grinder, a coffee grinder that you reserve specifically for your herbs, or even if you're working with we'll talk about fresh in a second. So you're going to want to create as much surface area as possible on your herbs. Placing your herbs into a heat-safe jar, so something like this. This is a ball container. You can use a mason jar. Making sure it's heat safe so that if you decide to apply heat later is really important. If you're not going for this particular, the first basic dry plant infusion, this is not a method you're going to apply heat to. So it just needs to be a good glass jar with a tightly sealing lid for this first one. You're going to stir it well once you have your oil of choice on top of your herbs, and then put your lid on and let it sit. I like to say let it sit for about 2 to 3 weeks, recommending letting it sit somewhere in the dark, so that you're not introducing light, so that you're not introducing oxygen, which will make the oil go rancid faster. Letting it sit somewhere in the dark. This is option 1. So, and then at the end, you're going to strain it, retain the oil, bottle it up, label it, and then you have it to enjoy. That's option 1. And for these are going to be the most stable, actually the second most stable. So letting it stay for 10 to 12 months, I would say use this type of infusion within 10 to 12 months. Sun and moon method. This is a super fun way that you can get a little artsy with it, or do a little bit more ritual or intentional work with your infusion. So using that method that we just talked about, super simple, in a jar with a lid on, taking it out and putting it under a special full moon for you. You're going to impart potentially some of those lovely moonbeam elements into it, whether it's something you believe or not is up to you. I really love this method because to me, regardless of if I'm getting a moment of rejuvenation from the sun or purification from the moon, regardless of how much of that may or may not be true, it puts in me an intention, which then transmits into the medicine. It's a vibrational transference that you're creating. So just like when you're creating a flower essence, it's all about the intention. It's all about your presence of awareness. So this is a fun way to sort of try method 1, then try method 1 another time, doing it with the sun or the moon, and just see what the energetic difference is. It's a really cool way to explore that part of yourself and the intuitive part of energy medicine. Next, we have our hot infusion method. This is going to be the method that we're going to do today. And additionally, with the hot infusion method, you are going to have the longest stability in your oil infusion. Because you're bringing it up to a certain temperature, there's a chance that any bacteria that's naturally on the plant that's dry is going to have less of a chance of surviving. You're going to bring up your temperature. So it's going to, in the end, be the most stable because of that. Some people and some people and some herbs don't necessarily need that heat extraction. So things like calendula, things like comfrey, yarrow, they don't necessarily, comfrey leaf, they don't necessarily need the heat to really pull out what they have to offer. However, I think that a heat infusion, this is always my preference, to start with a heat infusion, and then I may go sun and moon with it, because I feel like you get the most aroma out of your plants. So giving a little bit of heat, and you're not, as you're looking at this lineup of instruction, you're not going to have it go beyond 160 degrees Fahrenheit. It's still a relatively low temperature. However, getting it to that sweet spot, 140 to 160, is really going to help you to break down those, the plant, or break down, pull out the nutrients and the wonderful chemical constituents that are going to be beneficial for you. So super simply, very similar. However, instead of using a jar, which you can also create a double boiler with a jar and a saucepan, I have a double boiler system that I'm going to show you. So whether you're using a metal or glass double boiler, or if you'd prefer to have a heat-safe glass jar, and then you can create a water bath with any saucepan. That is going to be how you're doing your hot infusion method. So with your chosen botanicals, you're going to use about 1 part powdered or chopped dry herb, that we're talking about dry, nothing fresh right now, to about 5 parts, I'm sorry, by weight, but 5 to 10 parts of oil by volume. So an example, 1 part dry herbs to 10 ounces of oil is a pretty good, 1 ounce dry herb to about 10 ounces of oil is a pretty good ratio for this starting exercise. You can then boost the amount of nutrients that's in that infusion by cutting it down. So instead of doing 1 ounce to 10 ounces, you could do 1 ounce to 5 ounces. So 1 ounce dry herbs to 5 ounces of your chosen oil. You're going to combine, and you know what? I'm gonna switch over my camera so that I can just start doing this with you guys. So you are going to, I'm gonna stop this share for just a moment and walk you through it. Switch you over. Okay, so here we have our different herbs, and we are going to have our double boiler system set up. So this is where the herbs are going to go. This is where the water is going to go. You never want to add water to your oil infusion, or you are going to then potentially introduce bacteria. So I always start by adding my water to my double boiler. So I'm going to add enough water that it is going to gently boil up. And see, that's a little too much because this is still buoyant. So I'm going to eliminate a little bit of that water. You just want it to simmer underneath of your double boiler. And you'll see in the notes, that document that I've given you, that you may have to add a bit of water because you're going to want this to go for 2 to 4 hours. So I'm going to show you the rushed version today, just so that you can get an idea of what to expect when you're doing an oil infusion. But don't worry, you've got this. You've got your notes, you've got this. You can email me afterwards. We'll figure it out if you're stuck on something. So now that we have our water bath ready to go, the other, sorry guys, wrong thing. The other thing that you can do is you can put your water into your saucepan and use a glass jar. If you're going to use a glass jar, and ignore the water I have in there, that's my drinking water, so that I don't get parched with you guys. If you're gonna use a glass, if you're gonna use a glass jar for this infusion, I like to recommend actually placing either a cloth or a paper towel in the bottom so that the glass is not knocking against your saucepan and potentially creating any sort of, hold on one second, I'm getting a little interference. Ooh. Oh, thank you. um, so that you're not potentially cracking your glass jar. Even though this is heat safe, if it's knocking around in there because you've got your water simmering, you don't want it to accidentally crack and you'll lose that wonderful infusion that you've been working on. So putting either a tea towel, a thin towel, or a paper towel under there with your glass jar, this is what you're then going to be adding your herb and oil to do your infusion. But for today, we are going to use this double boiler method. So I'm going to ignore the paper towel option. We don't need it with this. So all of my herbs are dry and I have clean hands, clean, dry hands. You want to make sure that you are using clean hands, or you can use gloves. If you're producing this to sell, I strongly encourage you to use gloves and tie your hair back, get a mask on, especially right now. But since this is just for me, I'm not worried about it. So adding your herbs to your container. And for today, I'm actually not going to break these down into powdered herbs. I actually sometimes really love to see some of these big parts of my herbs floating around in my oil infusion. It reminds me of the energies and the different medicines and the components that I'm working with. So depending on what you're doing and how strong you want this oil infusion to be, you can either powder them or chop them. So I've got all my herbs in there. And as you can see, it's a significant amount of herbs. And this is only about a tablespoon of each of those herbs we talked about. And then I'm going to be using a non-GMO avocado oil for my infusion today. It's what I have here, so that's what I'm going to go for. But you can use olive oil. You can use, hold on. Woo, here we go. You can use olive oil. You can use sunflower oil. You can use sweet almond oil. Just if you know that you want the oil infusion to be something that you are working with culinary wise, make sure you know it's a consumable grade oil. If you're working with it cosmetic wise, I strongly encourage you still to buy organic if you can, buy non-GMO if you can. All of these things are important in your own health, the efficacy and the outcome of the product, as well as our blueprint in the world. And I'll skip back over to the document for a second. Nope, I keep hitting the wrong button. Or I'll skip back over to this camera. And the way that you want to think about your oil, if you're working with it just intuitively and you don't want to measure it out, just think about that you definitely want to have at least 1 part herb to 5 parts oil. So I'm going to do a pretty strong infusion with this. And you want to, as you're working with this hot infusion, you want to make sure that there's enough room in your vessel for things to move around. So as you can see, it will move around very, very well. Things are not so dense that there is not a significant amount of surface area exposed to the oil. All of that's important just in thinking about how you are going to extract those different herbs. So once you have this going, the next thing to do is put it on the stove top. I'm going to pop back over to that document for you guys so that we can talk about that a little bit. Pop it onto the stove top. Again, keeping it between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, depending on how long you're letting it go, I like to say between 2 and 4 hours. The longer you let it go, making sure that it's at a lower temperature is important. So keeping it closer to that 140 degrees. If you're going to have it go for a shorter amount of time, you might want to pop up the temperature closer to that 160. But it's up to you. Play. There's not just one way. Figure out what works for you. Figure out what you jive with. This is a guideline that I'm giving you. So once that's on the stove top, you're going to let it simmer. Once it starts simmering, make sure that it's not jangling. You know, you don't want this bouncing up and down. You want it to be nice and happy. If you're using the glass jar, make sure again that you're protecting the jar and that it's not knocking back and forth. Both ways are completely fine. Once it is been 2 to 4 hours, you're going to remove it from the heat. And at this point, I personally love to let it completely cool down, come to room temperature. And the reason for that is that it's going to add at least another hour or two to its infusion time. And it's a safer method to then work with to press out your oils or press out your herbs to retain as much oil as possible. So as you can see, step 6, oh wait, hold on. Step 4, remove from heat. At this point, cover. And another thing you can do is let it sit overnight. So sometimes I like to let it infuse for a full 24 hours after doing this heat method. Just make sure that you're covering it, that you're keeping it somewhere safe, that dust or hair particles from a pet are not going to end up in your infusion. And then the next day, it'll be plenty cool for you to then press out and work with. So at this point, straining your infused oil from the botanicals and pressing out all of your oil. This is something I love to stress because you worked hard on this. The plants have given everything they can. Don't let any drop go unused or wasted. So next, we are going to be straining out our oil. So pretend for today, we're doing this quickly. Pretend that this has gone heat infusion, 140 to 160 degrees for 2 to 4 hours and then sat overnight to completely cool. The next step is to remove the herbs. So I'm going to switch you over again. To remove your herbs, the best way that I can suggest to do is to start with a sieve like this, just a strainer, a tea strainer or a kitchen strainer, and just strain out your herbs as best you possibly can. And this will take a little longer or be faster depending on, how concentrated your oil is. But look at already how intense the color has changed just from a few minutes of sitting in these herbs. And some of them are going to be a little more finely powdered than others. So you'll also see that there are fine particles of the plant matter sitting underneath in this bowl that I'm catching all of that oil. So pressing out, and if your hands are clean, you can totally use your hands. I like to try to reserve my hands for the ending part so that there's less chance of contaminating it. And this is just step 1. So I'm going to then continue to scrape out and get every little bit of oil out of my container so that I am not wasting anything. And at this point, continuing to strain. And once you are done extracting the oil from your plant fiber, you'll notice that certain little fine particles have come through. There's a couple things that you can do. You can either cover this and let it sit overnight, and things will sink to the bottom of your chosen catching container. Some things will still be floating. The way that then I like to suggest doing this is having another container that you're going to decant into. So next step, I like to use a coffee filter. So this is just a paper coffee filter. You can also use a finely woven cotton muslin cloth or some other, like a finely woven cheesecloth, just something to catch all of these teeny tiny particles. So when you are pouring through, this is going to take a while, so I'm going to demonstrate it partially, not completely. But as you can see, in comparison to the original oil extraction, this paper filter is keeping all of those teeny tiny fine particles back. So this is going to take probably 30 minutes to have it go through. So I'm not going to do all of that with you. But paper filter is step number 2. Letting it settle out overnight will help to keep those particles back. You can also just use the finest mesh strainer that you want to. I like to suggest using the paper filter because I'm super sensitive. So my skin is sensitive and a lot of people's skin is sensitive. So the idea is that those tiny little fine particles that you might be like, whatever, I can just put it in there. If you're rubbing that onto your skin, again, it's one more component that might add to a dermal reaction, depending on the sensitivity of the skin. And if the idea is that you want to create something that's really luxurious or deeply penetrating, those fine particles can add to the clogging of your skin. So you don't want to add irritation where irritation isn't needed. If all you have is a fine mesh strainer, I would suggest, if you don't have a paper filter or another way to do this second step, I would strongly suggest that you let it sit. Again, once you've strained it out, let it sit overnight and let everything that you possibly can settle out. You can even let it sit for a full week in a tightly closed glass jar, clean glass jar, and let it settle out. I'm going to check do you have a trick for holding the coffee filter so you don't have to hold it for 30 minutes? Great question. Yes. So since I'm not in my own kitchen today, I don't have everything that I would need. However, if you have either some chemistry equipment or lab equipment for doing distillations and things like that, that has a way to hold the coffee filter, whether it be a funnel, you can put a funnel into a glass jar. So funnel, glass jar, coffee filter in the funnel. That's a super easy way. Most of us have at least a funnel on hand in our kitchens. Yeah, so that's super easy, inexpensive. But then also you can, there are varying coffee is amazing now. There's so many different ways to brew it. I have a cool glass funnel that came with a certain kind of coffee brewer that I cheat and use my coffee filter, and I put that in the glass funnel, and it like has a ring that sits and drops down into whatever I need to catch it in. But the funnel's super easy, so going for what's easy works. Any other questions about the infusion method we just discussed? I think we're doing good. Okay, so I'm going to go over the last infusion method. Getting back to our shared screen. Okay, so here we are. The last infusion method is our fresh plant infusion. And I wanted to cover this just briefly because so many of us are working with fresh herbs from our CSA at Foxhaven, or growing medicinal things in our yards, or want to play with wild harvesting, those plantain, those yarrow flowers. So fresh infusion is a really fun way to do something completely different. I like to always start by wilting the herbs for at least 12 hours before I am going to do the infusion. The reason for this is that when you're bringing in fresh plants, number one, letting them wilt gives anything still living a chance to crawl away. That's number one. So rinsing them off from the garden or from wherever you wild harvested, letting them sit outside in a covered area somewhere to then let any tiny little buggies crawl away. But then also it helps a lot of the moisture start to evaporate from the plant. So when you're working with a fresh infusion, this is the tricky part. You don't want your oil to have water in it. Otherwise, again, bacteria and rancidity are much stronger potential. So once you've let them wilt, chop them up as small as you can. Combine your oil and water into I like to always, you don't want to do the jar method. You want to do the heat method for this kind of infusion. So again, building up your double boiler. The trick with this one that makes working with a glass jar in your double boiler system a little bit easier is that you get to watch as the moisture bubbles come and rise up to the top of the surface and evaporate. So once the bubbles have stopped coming to the surface and popping, once that has stopped, there's no more moisture left in your oil, your fresh oil or fresh plant and oil infusion. This takes a lot longer, in my opinion, than the dried method. It's a lot trickier to master. I don't want to discourage you. I've given you step-by-step on how to do it. Just be aware. I would use this one definitely within 6 months. I would probably advise keeping this particular infusion even in the refrigerator. That way that if by chance you did not evaporate all of the moisture from your oil, you're not going to introduce bacteria any sooner into the, well, you're not going to have a massive issue on your hands. This is a tricky thing to do. And whenever we're working with skincare specifically, it's tricky because we have the beneficial bacteria that in essence, if they're all balanced and happy and good, should be able to take care of our skins. Those Langerhans should be able to say, oh, toxin alert, pull it down, get it through the blood system, expel it through the sweat glands, however it's going to expel it, but it doesn't always work that way. We're not always in tip-top shape. So just being aware, being patient with yourself, have fun with this method. It's a really cool way of working with plants and super fun. So if you can go out in your yard and pull something out of your garden and work with it this way. So it's a fun thing to do. Last, I want to just quickly, I'm going to share that screen again, just quickly. At the bottom of your document, there is a basic carrier oils, easy to work with, sort of guide. I chose avocado oil today. Avocado oil is one of my favorites in skincare because it penetrates the skin barrier fairly easily, meaning that it's going to bring that deep hydration into your system a little bit more effectively than some other oils will. But again, it all depends on so many things. So the best thing I can advise when you're trying to think about what kind of oil you want to work with in an infusion, you've got olive oil, you've got almond oil, you've got avocado oil. Put a little bit of each one on a different area of your forearm or an area that's sensitive on your body. Number one, you will see how quickly you have a reaction. Should you have a negative one, a positive one? You'll also get to see how it absorbs. How does it feel on that area of your skin? Everyone is different. And until you have a strong understanding of how your skin responds to something, you won't necessarily have that, aha, I want to make an oil infusion for so-and-so sort of moment and just intuitively know what they might need. So understanding how the oils penetrate your own skin is going to be a wonderful tool to helping you long-term sort of create a skill and a craft out of this practice. But as you can see, I've given you little guides as to what the different oils do. So whether they penetrate fastly, a little tidbit on their nutrients, or who potentially, who potentially even could benefit. Yeah, like olive oil. Olive oil is so rich in fatty acids, it's going to be really hydrating. So for someone who lives like in Utah, olive oil would be a great choice for an oil infusion because it's going to be a lot more hydrating. For someone that lives in a drier climate. For us Maryland residents, something like grapeseed or jojoba are awesome. Grapeseed is probably my favorite oil. It has a wonderful moisturizing quality, but also leaves your skin feeling super satiny without feeling extremely oily afterwards. Jojoba is that magic one that makes us hear sebum everywhere in the skincare world. Jojoba is not actually an oil, it's a liquid wax. And just like our skin produces that sebum, that natural hydration, it is a waxy, oily substance. So jojoba is the closest in the plant world to the type of hydration our skin naturally produces, which is why it's used in a lot of acne balancing things, or eczema, not so much, acne balancing or hormonal based sort of skin irritant issues. So with that, I think we have about 5 minutes left. You guys have this document, you have your botanicals document. Does anyone have any questions at all?
I have a question, yeah.
Yeah,
Of the plants mentioned here, are any of them best used fresh?
best use fresh. I would say that St. John's wort, that would be one that St. John's wort and calendula, both of those I would say are going to be best used fresh. St. John's wort does this really incredible thing in its fresh form. The flower itself, so when you're using St. John's wort fresh, using about the top 5 to 6 inches of the plant and flower, so leaf and flower, destemming it, using the leaves, using the flowers, it creates this incredible, almost red-like hue in your oil infusion. And actually, with that, you can do, so I know I'm breaking my rule, and sorry, I know I'm teaching you something I just told you I wouldn't normally do, but with St. John's wort, I have made some really cool infusions that don't apply heat. And sort of one way to get around that is to let the plant wilt for about 12 hours and then submerge it into your oil completely. You want to make sure that if you're using the fresh and not applying heat, it's submerged completely under the oil. Otherwise, mold can form on the surface of the oil. Put your lid on, but let the lid not be completely on. Like, don't tighten it, the screw on as much as you normally would for that kind of an infusion. That way there's room to let the oxygen, the moisture evaporate and expel through the air. You could, as a beginner, I would strongly suggest that you play with dry forms or heat when you're working with fresh herbs first, until you get to know, you'll pick up and you'll start to begin to notice when the bubbles are stopping, about how long with that fresh plant applying heat it takes. Will give you some sort of thought, like if you're not applying heat, it's probably going to take days and days and days. I think this last round that I made that I just got from Foxhaven, it probably took 10 days for the bubbles to stop coming to the surface. And then I was able to screw the lid on all the way. And now it's sitting in a windowsill getting sunshine. Because again, I want to infuse the sunshine into that beautiful sunny plant. Great question. And thank you for notifying me to it. Calendula is another one that's really cool to play with in that same way. Again, it's going to get this gorgeous sort of orangish color if you're working with it fresh. You can still get that in the dry form from not so much from St. John's wort, at least not in my experience, but in the calendula, you will. And I would say of anything you're going to infuse, even in things that we haven't talked about, flowers overall, I feel like are something that benefits strongly from a fresh plant infusion. That's just sort of in my own practice and my own experience with plants overall. It feels like, thinking about it in a similar way that you would with tea, the flowers are going to need the least amount of heat when you're brewing a tea. So the least amount of heat, the least amount of time to do what they do. So thinking about that as well with oil infusions, the flower doesn't necessarily need the heat and doesn't necessarily need the extra time to process or dry out the way that a leaf or a root would, or something like a mushroom.
Another question, which plant is best for use every day as a daily face moisturizer?
Oh, I can only choose one. Of the ones we talked about today, I would say calendula. Calendula every single day is something that will be gentle enough, will really help topically, but also do some penetration into those deeper layers because of its wound healing capabilities. For somebody, I would say that is relatively normal skin to dry skin, calendula. Um, for someone who maybe has a little bit more problematic skin, calendula is still going to be great because it has antiviral, antibacterial capabilities to it. So if you just want to pick one to work with in an oil infusion, and that's actually, thank you for asking this question. This is a really, really neat way to experience the difference between, say you have an experience with calendula, either in a tincture form or in a tea form, or you've just been growing it in your garden. You have a relationship with that plant already. So there's a buildup of and an influx of information and symbiotic relationship, communication that you just an intuitive knowing that you already have with this plant. Working with it on its own in an oil, you will have already a strong understanding of what it's capable of, but it will teach you a lot working with it on its own. So it's a really, really good question, really great way to, if you're not familiar with how to infuse or you haven't done much with skincare specifically, working with one plant can be really, really rewarding.
Here's a question from Christina. Do you use mostly the flowers and not the leaves or both? I think that's directed to calendula, but if you wanted to just briefly go through all the plants
Sure.
you used today.
Yeah. So regarding calendula specifically, since I'm gonna, yeah, okay, calendula. Calendula, I would say flowers. I've never used the leaf in an infusion. I actually, huh, at the moment, I'm not even sure I would suggest it because I wouldn't know much about using the leaf. So that's something I'm curious about now. Um, but definitely the flower for calendula. For St. John's wort, you can use both the flower and the leaf. You can use the finer stems as well. I like to dissuade against the harder stems because there isn't going to be as much nutrient content in them. The leaves and the flowers are really where it's at with St. John's wort. With comfrey, you can use the leaf, you can use the flower, you can use the stem, you can use the root. So if you're going to use roots, I would not do fresh in an infusion. Just my own personal recommendation, especially for a beginner, I wouldn't because they're sucking up the water. So they're going to retain a lot of natural moisture themselves, but they're awesome in infusions. So they're going to go to those deeper layers. Thinking about it like our skin, the roots are going to really feed into those deeper layers of the skin as well, providing moisture, providing or enriching nutrients, depending on the plant, maybe moisture. Marshmallow root is awesome for moisture. Getting back to comfrey though, you can use all parts of the plant. Echinacea, you can use, yeah, you can use all parts of the plant for echinacea, root, leaf, flower, stem. For skincare specifically, I don't know much about, and I haven't had experience using the root, echinacea root in skincare, but I've had lots of experience using the flower and the leaf and stems. So I would say, but all parts are okay. Plantain. Plantain is just going to be leaf, and you can do flower as well. But the roots are so small. I don't know any reason why you couldn't, just from the medicinal standpoint, but I don't know how beneficial it would be. And then let's see, what's the last one? We've got calendula, St. John's wort, echinacea, comfrey, plantain, yarrow. Oh, how could I forget yarrow? Thank you. Yarrow, the leaf, and the flower. The stems are, again, don't have much in them, and the root I don't know anything about it being used in skincare. But the leaves are super awesome. The flower is going to impart more of an aroma And but both the leaf and the flower will contain some of those medicinal qualities that you want in your skincare. And just as like a sort of ending note, when working with plants, and a lot of you were in working with Foxhaven already know this, but when working with plants, you do want to make sure that you are consulting someone about them. If you're brand new to a plant, something like St. John's wort does have the ability to have some interference with various medications and things. That one specifically, I know, has a lot of ifs and or buts. So just being aware of the potential side effects is important. And if you or someone you know has an immediate reaction, don't use it, and talk to your doctor. But seeking some advice from a professional before using them to you specifically is an important part of any plant medicine. And with skincare, it's just as important. Any other questions, guys? Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to give you a shout out. If anybody has loved this presentation, please check out Lauren's website, fruittotheroots.com, right?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll put the website in the chat.
Yeah, and follow her on Instagram because she's always cooking something up. I see her doing live videos and all this kinds of stuff, and it's really fun to follow her. Fruits to the Roots on Instagram.
And then my email is just lauren@fruitstotheroots.com. Make sure I get all those letters in there. So feel free to take a screenshot of all of those things. Reach out to me if you have any questions about the information we covered today, or if something isn't quite clear. Over the next week, just forewarned, I will be completely out of cell phone range starting Tuesday, and so out of internet range as well. But I will be back on the grid beginning Saturday next week. So if you have any immediate questions after being a part of the class today, feel free to email me today or tomorrow. I'll get back to you. And if not, I will be in touch with you as soon as I can. But even in the future, I do teach a lot of online classes, not as many scheduled at the moment, but I do have a couple upcoming in August and September. But I would love to connect with all of you further. So thank you, Foxhaven, so much for the opportunity to share the information. Growing the community of awareness around skincare is my passion. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. I'll be sending this recording out tomorrow, so you can look out for that. And take care until next time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.